I'm going to hand it over to Megan right now to share her story and Bob's story.
Hi guys, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here, and actually, I really love sharing this story, and I really love sharing this story, especially after all that information that we just heard, because I think, well, one of the things Stephanie and I talked about when we were preparing for this webinar is how often case studies are when things go terribly wrong, right? We take a look at what happens when things go terribly wrong. And so what I want to do instead today is sort of flip that over and say, what does it look like when things go terribly right? Right. And then I want to show first what the last 7 weeks of my dad's life looked like for him and for the rest of the family. And then I want to backtrack and kind of give you the context of why, right? What did it take for us to get to a place where we were able to have such a successful dying process? And finally, what I want to do is get behind the red tape, as they tell me is my job today. And I have some notes on the exact figures and numbers for the exact costs of what we spent to do what we did. So hopefully it gives some good insight. So my dad, really cool guy, retired third grade teacher, sailor, everybody's favorite guy around town. You know, if you've ever been related to a teacher, you know how it is. Everywhere you go, somebody knows your parent, and just a really, really fun person. And he moved closer to be near my family. I'm a mom of two young kids. I live up in Ventura, California, and he was about 2 hours away. So he was a widow of my mother. They had been married for 44 years. And so he decided that he was going to move closer to be near his kids and grandkids. And about 2 months after he moved here, during which point he went on two international trips, one to Cuba and I think one to Mexico, separate trips. Anyways, big traveler, fun guy, started experiencing some of those health issues. And we really thought it was going to be COPD. We really thought it was going to be something manageable. And on June 12th of last year, we went in to get a scan. And I actually went with him. Um, and the doctor was wonderful, had some really good bedside manner, and was incredibly direct and said, this is bad news. This doesn't look good. And so beginning on June 12th, we had an idea that this was not going to play out the way that one might hope. And by June 25th, my dad had a biopsy. He had whatever scans and jumped through all the hoops that you do. And the biopsy returned that it was lung cancer that had spread to a number of places. It would be considered stage 4. And the oncologist who called for the biopsy actually asked my dad to drive down about 40 minutes to the office to receive the results, which we knew what the results were. There was not a lot of question of what the results were. And they said that they had a policy that they were unable to share those results over the phone. Well, I knew that one of the things my dad hated to do was go to the doctor. And we had a really frank conversation, he and I said, does it matter what the results are? If our goal is to stay out of the doctor's office, what are we going to do to achieve that goal? And what we were able to do, based on advice from two of the esteemed colleagues on the phone or on the call here, Stephanie and Jill, what we were able to do was engage with a hospice in our area. And although the doctor had a policy that they were unable to give a diagnosis of this sort over the phone to a patient, there wasn't a problem for them to give the diagnosis to a hospice. There was nothing to prevent that. And so we were able to actually get hospice to arrive at our house within the time it would have taken us to pack him up into the car and get him transferred down and up into the elevator into their doctor's office. So I felt like we skipped a step. And to this day, that's one of my proudest accomplishments of all time. I knew what my dad wanted and didn't want, and I was able to put in front of him the options. And it got a little heated on the phone, right? I mean, I was trying to navigate something that Jill mentioned in the chat box there is you got to know the difference between policy and law. And the people that you're working with do have jobs, and part of their job is to follow policy. And part of your job as an advocate is to find ways to make that policy work in your favor. And so the picture here on the screen on the left was taken on, I have my dates here, was taken on June 26th. So we got the diagnosis on June 25th, got hospice there that night, got the comfort kit, which is all the good pain meds and all the anti-anxiety drugs delivered that night. And I got on Airbnb and reserved a beautiful, absolutely magical rental home about 45 minutes away from where we lived that night. We were there in under 24 hours. I called the hospice to tell them what our plan was, thinking that maybe they would want to hold off on, I don't know, I thought it would be a problem. They were beyond supportive. They asked for the address, asked if we'd like them to front run supplies up there, asked them to send pictures of what the place looked like so that if there was an issue and we needed to call them, they were prepared with a site inspection. I never could have imagined that they would not even be supportive and accommodating, but encouraging of that. So we spent 3 magical days up in Ojai. We drank through all the good wine that we had at my dad's house. We packed in, and this will be a theme, is alcohol consumption, but I don't think that that's required. I think anything that you enjoy as a family, if that's cotton candy, replace what I say about beer and wine with cotton candy. But what we were able to do was start what we kind of called the Ender Bender. And we went on a 7-week party. And for 7 weeks straight, we ensured that every single day contained a component of celebration because that's what we had bought with that time. So immediately upon return from this Ojai trip, I asked my dad very directly. I said, Dad, I am your nearest family member, both in proximity and relationship. And I cannot be here to celebrate life and live it with you and also be running point on caregiving. And as a mom of a 2 and a 4-year-old, I need to know that you're safe. Otherwise, I can't sleep. I'm going to wear myself so thin, and we need to look into 24-hour companion care. And he really didn't want to do it. But because I had come to him in a way that said, I need this for me, I don't need it for you, I was really frank. He didn't need it yet, but I also knew that we couldn't wait until he did need it. And that's really a theme here, is just bringing things into play before it's critical in an emergency allows you to play with the times and become comfortable with it and find the caregiver, right? So my dad ended up being able to make really wonderful relationships with the people that ended up being there for him when he was completely unconscious in a bed, and at that truly end of life stage. You know, it's almost like the nanny, right? You bring a nanny in as a mom, you bring a nanny in when they're little tiny infants and hope that they really, really like them. And you know that by the time they're a toddler, everybody's in love with them. But when they're so fragile and little and they can't tell you anything, you just have this wish that it's somebody who you trust. And so being able to go in the opposite direction was really, really amazing. And also, Jill mentioned the opportunity to go home. This is something that we always knew. There was never a consideration of where this should happen. It should happen at home. And so taking that question off the table was really great. Um, so um, we did end up using medical aid in dying, which is legal here in California. And when I say we used medical aid in dying, I want to be clear. I think that anytime you engage in the medical aid in dying process and explore it in any conscious way, you are using medical aid in dying. You do not need to consume the prescribed medication in order to benefit from the choice and the process. And so we ended up receiving, we I asked my dad whether he would be interested in meeting with a death doula. Jill and I were friendly colleagues at that point. We'd worked on a number of projects, but we were friendly colleagues, and I appreciated and respected her and gave him the option, and he was very open to it. Jill came and met with my dad on July 2nd, and it was so cool. It just felt like a hangout. My dad was a really cool, fun guy, just like Jill's dad. And I think there's like a lot of similarities there, but she came and hung out for a while, and then at a certain point she excused me from the room and she had a conversation with my dad, and it was really special to know that he was getting direct support, I was getting direct support. We had somebody who was just helping us navigate this really confusing time. And that's when the medical aid and dying conversation, which I had always known was his choice, that's when it really became a true reality. And Jill made the referral that day. Actually, before she pulled away from the curb, she reached out to Dr. Bob Uslander down in Del Mar, and Dr. Bob was able to get the process started. This is one of those things where even when you've had all the conversations and know all the wishes, you really do need that person who's there in the moment and knows who is currently taking patients and what the current process and legality is. We were aware that it had become legal, but we didn't know how it worked. And so Jill really kickstarted that. We handled those important meetings, and my dad did go through and receive the prescription. And then you work with a specialized pharmacy. And because of the way his disease progressed, by the time the prescription was available, and there's a certain number of waiting period, I knew that he was far from being able to consume the liquid in the same way, but I still had these professionals on my team. I had this pharmacist and the doctor and the nurse in Dr. Bob's office, integrated medical care. And I had these people that were advising me. And so my pharmacist kept the package fully ready to go, fully filled. The drugs were filled. I did not get charged, but it was ready to be couriered to our house at a moment's notice. And that was exactly the sense of security that my dad needed in order to reach. So you see here on the left, he's got his full oxygen tank. He's on morphine and Ativan on June 26th. And the picture on the right was taken on August 2nd. And that was really it was his dinner party, and it was a very hand select group of people. There were probably 6 to 10 times as many people who wished they could have been there. And part of what I offered was the ability to keep it small so that it could be exactly what he envisioned, which was a bright, lively party that was also going to be the last time he saw a lot of the really special people in his life. And so that took place on August 2nd, and almost immediately thereafter, family stayed in town, and the people that weren't invited to the party were invited to stop by for like a reception the next day. It was pretty special. He really held a firm boundary there, and I appreciated it. Although I was the one that had to enforce it, and that was incredibly difficult, it also felt like a real gift that we were able to maintain that atmosphere. And so, uh, shortly after this party, we had family in town for about the next 48 hours. And then he went into a very natural week-long demise, and he died on August 11th. So 7 days after family left, he departed. And it couldn't have gone better. And truly the reason behind this is because my dad had had some really terrible experiences leading up to it. And I sort of saw him as the buck stops here guy, right? He had helped not only my mom go through some really traumatic cancer treatments in 2017, he had also helped close down the estate of both of his parents as well as my mom's mom. So he had handled 3 death, dying, and estate closing processes as sort of the key figure in the family. And he had also really been there front and center to see what my mom had been through. And as I mentioned earlier, my mom died while I was on maternity leave. So I was pregnant during her cancer. She really did run a battle. She ran a cancer battle, and Bob didn't. Bob just lived. He lived with cancer the way some people live with, all kinds of different conditions. He just lived until he stopped. I think that it's really important that my dad never held back about what a painful experience and how unnecessary it was to be faced with the sort of unanswered questions in previous instances. I know that, he was a writer, and he wrote some stuff that he never was shared during his lifetime, but that was shared with me. And he talked very, very frankly about the experience of being the youngest son of 4 boys and having to not only navigate his parents' deaths, but see how his 3 older brothers were navigating it. And he did not have very kind words for those things. So I think preventing that from befalling my sister and I, and that's my sister on the left there in the black shirt, And one thing I want to point out about this picture, which I just really love, is that we had this dinner party. We had it catered. You can see he was. I called him Deathzilla because he was. We had a lot of good jokes, but he really went to town on this backyard party that I put more effort into than I did my own wedding. But it, as we were having the photo taken by the caterer, a giant rat ran along the back fence, and it was so startling. Everybody screamed, and then everybody started laughing. And so that's the picture that you see right here. And we all were joking later about whether that was, his favorite hilarious aunt who always liked to play tricks, or his dad who was a real joker. So it was a real fun way to um, be able to joke around. And it's that Black humor, but it was really accepting of what was happening. We had two private musicians that attended it, a steel drummer and an electric guitarist. You try to find those on short notice when you're thinking at any moment that you might need to shift this whole thing a week forward if his physical condition starts to take a break. But one of the other things that's really important is my dad had a bad experience with the deaths that he had run point on. And I didn't realize this until after he had died, is that he wanted to make sure that planning and facing this wasn't a painful process for us. And so really what he did is he engaged my sister and I in the planning process for his death immediately upon my mom's death. And one of the most relevant moments was when he took us out. We had a champagne toast before we went to meet with the trust attorney, because he said, after I die, this is one of the first people that you guys are going to have to talk to. So I want to make sure that you, before you meet him, you get loosened up and you guys like each other, or something like that. And I think that being able to see not only the benefits of a plan, but the way a plan itself doesn't have to be a painful process. It can be something that allows you to live more vibrantly because you have faced it head on.